Trustee Hallwax.
Here.
Trustee Listener. Trustee Mealopoulos.
Here.
Trustee Underdog. Here. Trustee Rubin. Here. Trustee Scott.
Here.
President Rowan.
Here.
Okay,
They will not Blake here.
This is you, Howard.
Okay, so because I can't be there in person, I'm gonna participate remotely, and I've asked Trustee Rubin to chair, and I think we ought to have a vote to approve that regime.
Move to approve that.
Second.
Do a roll call real quick. Trustee Hallwax.
Yes.
Trustee Mealopoulos.
Yes.
Trustee Underdog.
Yes.
Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Trustee Scott.
Yes.
So that carries. Trustee Rubin, proceed.
Thank you. We're not live streaming this meeting tonight, but we are recording, right? Good. And that video will be available on the village's YouTube channel. This portion of the meeting allows for those who are here, if they have anything they'd like to bring up to address the board regarding non-agenda items. And I will request that public comments that relate to agenda items be provided when we get to that item. And there's one item on the agenda, so that's pretty clear. And all comments should be limited to 3 minutes. And if anyone has a comment, I'll let you know when the 3 minutes is up. Okay. All right, hearing and seeing none. Then if Assistant to the Village Manager, John Pape, would please take it away and talk to us about the renovations.
Thank you, Trustee Rubin. I appreciate it. So as part of the 2023 budget, we included dollars to go through a redesign process for the Village Hall's council chamber.
Excuse me. Oh, you're good. Sorry, never mind. Sorry. Sorry.
Don't worry.
It's upstairs. Sorry.
So again, redesigning this year with the thought that we would do some of the due diligence. And although we have a placeholder in the 2024 CIP, we wanted to do a process to sharpen those numbers and be able to put together an accurate budget for what we're looking at cost-wise to renovate the council chambers in 2024 or beyond. As we kind of dive into this, we'll talk a little bit about the scope. I put this, satellite image of Village Hall here, just to kind of talk generally about the Village Hall's second floor. You can kind of see the 4 wings there. They're less noticeable from the ground level, but generally aware that the staircase, the elevator is kind of in that middle portion. And then of the 4 wings, one of them is the council chambers, the one that faces Wyman Green. And then 2 of them are public safety living quarters. They have up there their kitchen, their day room, men's and women's locker rooms, men's and women's sleeping quarters, those areas of the public safety department, as well as 1 wing that currently houses family service at Glencoe. They have about 3 or 4 offices and some meeting space that's in that 4th wing, and they have since the building was constructed. As we break into scope, I think it's important to remember that we talk about this now because we understand that a component of this project is going to have to also be the public safety living quarters. We are currently in the process of finishing the renovation of the public safety kitchen. That was been budgeted for many years and is finally nearly complete, I believe. But there's other portions up there that are still original to the building. They're 1950 original. The locker rooms and the living quarters, the sleeping quarters, that are still original to the building. As part of this year's budget, we're doing the same thing we're doing tonight of going through a redesign budgeting estimation process for those 2. It's actually with the same architect that we use for the council chambers. We don't have all those numbers back yet. We're expecting to finish that in the next 4 to 6 weeks yet. So I say that because as we talk about moving forward with this project, we're gonna have to phase the 2 together in some form. And I just want that to kind of underscore the conversation we're having today. The overall renovation is much more than just the AV. I think that's the stuff that kind of screams to you as needing it when you're in the room because the mics don't work very well, the speakers don't work very well, the presentations on those projectors behind you guys are hard to see. But there's also a lot of other building maintenance and improvements that need to take place in the building and other general functionality enhancements. The last major renovation in this room took place in 1992. Many of the AV components are 1992 AV components. Their 30 years of life is beyond what we'd expect of that usefulness. It's not surprising that they're failing. Other components like the ceiling tiles, the HVAC units, the electrical are original to the building. They are not failed, but they're, again, out of useful life and make it difficult to look at some of these components of the AV upgrades without also looking at those components as well. For example, you're going to put new wires in the ceiling, you're going to put new cores in the floor for power, you're going to do those things. It's hard to just do the AV pieces. Some of these processes that we're talking through tonight include much more than that, and that's why. Not only do they address all of the deferred maintenance that's been in that portion of Village Hall to make it functional, but also in a building that we are squeezed for space and creates more useful space to us. That is not only for staff training, but also for what we would call kind of medium-sized meetings, ones that, have 20 members of village staff perhaps, but also other groups. FSG uses that space a lot for meetings. We use it for large-scale trainings for ourselves, but also other municipalities that might come to use it with us. And then finally, as an EOC, so an Emergency Operations Center. You may remember that in the 2023 budget, we included funds to renovate the EOC as a part of this project. Originally, that was looked at maybe renovating the EOC that is currently housed in the basement of this building as part of the public safety area. We realized that not only would we be spending those dollars down there in an EOC that still would be a little small and a little limited in its capacity for that, but we'd also be putting a lot of components in those spaces that also need to go in the council chambers. That reapproach for 2023 includes combining those two uses so that the EOC could, if needed to be called upon, function in this room as well. We hope to kind of benefit both projects by doing it there so they can kind of each get a little bit more. We'll show you again that some of the components that are for this room are part of that project as well. So I just wanted to mention that in addition to all the AV stuff, which of course is not cheap, there's also a bunch of these other components that we're looking to do as well. The deferred building maintenance and improvements, and also all these things are going to make the space more functional and more usable. The example that I'd give is this room here. We used to use the finance conference room for a lot less than we use it today because of the AV components and the functionality that makes it useful for. It's now one of the more used spaces in Village Hall for those types of purposes. Again, some of the things we'll talk about are not nice to haves. They're must haves. There's other things that we can talk about that are beyond that, things that are not mission critical, but allow us to use the space in different ways. What we've kind of done year to date so far, we issued the RFP. We actually did that in late 2022 as we anticipated that this year. But we issued the RFP. We received 4 responses to it, 3 from architectural firms and 1 from an AV firm. Ultimately, we decided to contract with 2 firms, both Kluber Architects for all the design pieces of it, as well as a company called AVI. AVI is an AV only space. That's their outfit. They build and install AV spaces in government buildings, but also hospitals, education centers, churches, things like that. We felt that due to the fact that this project had such a large AV component, although the architect has an aspect of their office that can handle those, there was a significant enough component that we wanted somebody that was kind of best of show, best of trade for that part of the process. So we ultimately contracted with both of those to do the due diligence that got us to this point today. We also worked with staff. A lot of the people in this room participated in conversations and interviews with those 2 firms to establish all the programmatic needs. If we're going to put EOC in there, what needs to be functioning? If we're going to have other types of flexible use space meetings in there, what needs to be functioning in here? And ultimately prepared 3 design options. They're kind of good, better, best. They obviously scale in cost. They scale in functionality, they scale in finish. So as we talk through those today, we'll do them kind of in that order from 1 to 3rd, least expensive to most expensive, least amount of features to most, and we'll kind of walk through some of those pieces. I want to underscore over the next 2 slides things that are included in all 3 phases. All 3 design options. The reason they're included in all 3 is because these are the mission critical things as this part of the project, and because of that, they are the base of the budget. They take up a decent portion of that, and they're happening in all 3 phases. So on the AV side, new microphones, new speakers, new cameras that not only will help to feed the video conferencing component, but will also help to feed the village's live streams. audio conferencing, which can be accomplished within a video conferencing, picture being on a Zoom call without video, but also separately with phone. That could be critical for EOC component. New monitors, that's both for the folks that are sitting up at the board table or any of the other committees or commissions using the room, but also for the audience. New source device inputs, that means how you're going to connect a laptop or a phone or anything else to display on those monitors. So that's new connects for both HDMI, but also USB and wireless devices connecting to feed those monitors. And then finally, the installation and programming of all these components, also part of this AV portion of the budget. On the design side, all of these things, and I know it's a long list, but I'm gonna run through it quickly. Carpet replacement, painting all the walls, touching up all the woodwork in there, which you guys are familiar with now. Repairing the dais to either be repaired in kind. You guys see more than anybody that table that's falling apart, or replacing it completely. Lighting replacement, LEDs, new function, brightening the room. Ceiling replacement, that current original to the building tile that's up there that has water stains and is not going to be, doesn't allow functional space above it for wiring and other components. Window treatments in the room, a new mobile podium that has some of these functions in them. In-floor power and data boxes, we'll revisit that once we're looking at the plans. It'll make a little bit more sense, but areas in the floor throughout the room to be able to hook up power and data to, that's critical for some of the small gathering spaces, but also the EOC componentry. Electric and data improvements, HVAC improvements. There's those big old diffusers that are in the ceiling now. They're kind of part of the light fixtures. Those are original to the building. They sweat. That's part of the reason why we have the water issues up there. We also need to create some more space. If we're going to do a new drop ceiling, we'd improve that as part of the process. An AV closet installation. This could be part of storage, but it's also necessary to house all the new componentry. Furniture replacement, the chairs that are falling apart, the chairs that are not stackable, the tables that right now are Costco 60-foot tables, that don't really have any place to go. The portico door replacement. Those are the doors that sit behind where President Rowan's normally stationed that go out to the small portico here. They don't help at all with any of the efficiency of the room. They barely function, and we'll kind of get to some of those spares later too. And then as well as contingencies for design and construction, just as part of the overall budget here, the architect included some of those in. Again, I'll work through these concepts rather quickly. We can always stop and come back to them, but I kind of want to give a brief overview of each. Important to note about the first one, again, this is the most economical concept. And as we start to kind of look at some of these pieces, I hope you guys can kind of see that all right. But this is the option that leaves the most things in place as it is today. The dais remains largely as is, although it does get a new table on the back side of it, kind of leaving that front wooden piece in place, but designing a new table to fit behind it, which gets all new wiring. But the room configuration is staying as it is today. This puts in a new drop ceiling just below. All the designs do. This is a 2x2, tile ceiling that would be below the existing ceiling, creating enough space for all the new wiring componentry and all those pieces, but would give, the clean new look and would allow us to remove, anything else that we need to above it. And really the area around the portico doors stays as is. We'll talk about that in a second. You can kind of see, if I can show with my mouse, this has the 5 TVs. They're 85-inch monitors, kind of behind where the projectors are now, but also on the back of the room. As we look at some more of the renderings, we'll show some of those. I want to point out these are the power cores that are on all 3 of the design options, and I'll show later how they play in. Here, picture the metal closed, cabinetry piece that's in the floor that has the data and power within it. Here's the example of the same room setup, but here it's been cleared out and the tables around there. This is kind of that large meeting space type of area. And then here's kind of the EOC layout where we've broken into small groups that are all serving different functions. You can see that they're able to have power and data from where they are. These 2 here are able to kind of have those monitors serve as part of those stations. And so we're able to kind of start to bring some of that more functionality into the room. Obviously, these aren't the only 3 layouts. It could be classroom style for training, completely remove the furniture for large group gatherings, something like that. Here's kind of that color rendering of the same. Again, the dais remaining largely as is. This is that new mobile podium. It has inputs on it. And then obviously the village board remaining, the portico doors are replaced, but kind of remain as is. And then you can see some of these large monitors that are around the room. This option also, due to the distance for these from the village, whomever, I don't want to even say the village board because it could be any other board or commission that is using the room, also includes the installation of small 15-inch monitors along this side, so you're able to see that information in front of you. As we look at another rendering, same space, kind of, looking at it from a different view, but again, largely as is. And then here's that one monitor that kind of goes in the back. You could look over to that as well. It also could be useful if you were in the, more of this setup where you could see these folks here have a monitor to look at. So that's kind of how it accomplishes that part of it. As we move on to concept 2, again, this is kind of the moderate cost option. It includes some more features, right? So in addition to the drop ceiling in concept 1, we just have kind of pieced in there what I would call kind of your standard builder grade light in terms of 2x2 lights that go into that drop ceiling. This includes elements like the architectural lights that have a little bit more of a design element to them, automatic shades that are programmed as part of the AV system. You could imagine that if you were having a meeting up there in the day and you wanted the shades to be drawn to help amplify the video componentry in the room, the AV system has the ability to raise and lower those shades as part of it. And then another concept that we'll point out here is this half wall podium. So it's essentially like, a half height wall that's in the middle here and has a TV on it. The benefit of that is that this option eliminates those monitors on the desk and puts one monitor here. It's kind of the close one that you can look right over. It's right in front of the speaker. You can kind of be able to view that as you're listening to the speaker speak.
Is the monitor on the desk kind of a pain?
Well, the downside of it is the fact that it does break up that portion of the room, and you'll see that as we look at some of the other schematics. Yeah. And again, let me pause to say, any of these options could be mixed and matched, of course, but as we're looking at, generalities, this is one of those things. This option also puts some decorative elements behind the dais that are next to the portico. The idea with that is that not only do we kind of improve some of the look and feel there, but we also create a raceway for us to do some cabling to be able to bring some of those things from the ceiling drops to the dais without just putting wire covers on it. So again, kind of some of those other elements to it. You can see here's that same 20-seat-ish layout that has the space for it, but again, this is remaining because it's structurally part of the room. And then as we look at, again, we're kind of calling this the EOC style layout, but it could be for any small group for any purpose, where now these folks still have those monitors on the wall to look at. This one's kind of arranged in that way because that half wall's there. Those 4 power cores are still in there, things like that. And I point them out because as we talk about budget in a second, things like putting those power cores on the floor are critical to be able to make it usable for these EOC componentry or small training or classroom style if we needed to bring in computers or other elements to that. They're also not cheap. It's part of, pouring through the concrete floor. There's minimal, but there's some work that has to be done on the first floor to make that possible, to get that power, data, whatever it be up to it.
We have nothing in the floor right now, right?
That's correct. All we have is really what's on the dais, and part of that function is because it's on that false floor that's the raised dais.
Everything else is in the walls.
Yeah. I just put this drop in there. Again, this is showing the ceiling grid, which is not exciting, but I wanted to show those lights that I was talking about. Again, this is as we move up in the options here, it has a slightly elevated style to it as we talk about some of those pieces, as well as some of the other lights behind the dais. Here's those renderings. Again, largely the same as rendering number 1, but what we see here is some of these decorative pieces that do some of this. It includes the branding up above, and these are those raceways that we talked about. It also includes, and I blew by when we were looking at this, but includes this ADA ramp. So there's a ramp on that side of the dais. It's not at the right slope to meet ADA. Option 2 includes, the adjustment of that to make it ADA compliant.
And a fully reconstructed dais in this alternative, which is partly why it's easier to make that ramp more compliant.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, so it also is part of option 2.
So option 2, they knock it down completely.
And rebuild it.
Then, reclad that front of it as well as the back thing to be able to make some of these adjustments throughout the room. Brings it out a little further. The ramp comes a little further. Thank you, Phil. You'll see here that everything else is the same except for this half wall. This is kind of rendering that, where you could imagine if you're sitting behind the dais, you'd be able to see that monitor that has whatever information the rest of them do as you speak to this speaker. Again, on the AV componentry, this one doesn't include those monitors. It's kind of just the swap out of this for that solution. But as we work toward this, we could always make adjustments to that. Option 3 is obviously the costliest option, but it takes the most dramatic changes to the room. In option 3, the dais is removed from that wall and placed on
West wall.
thank you. The west wall to kind of reconfigure the room. We gained some more seating in this setup. 48 to 56 is what they're estimating, but it does open up a portion of the room to be available for some of those other flex use spaces. You'll see this one includes 6 monitors along the sides of the wall, and because there's no half wall, this one does propose those smaller monitors at the new dais as well. Again, could be kind of take it or leave it. It also includes some of those the light features, the shade features that are part of the system can be raised and lowered. The shades, the lights can be dimmed as part of that system. It also, well, I'll get to it when we look at the
Wait, that's as you walk in, be on the left, right? This is
So
the
you
door.
walk in and it would, it's the west wall. It currently sits on the north wall.
here's the portico.
Okay.
Here's where the dais is now. This is that main entry door.
Yeah.
And that's, that would be the kind of the new flow of the room. Here's kind of that 20 seating element, again, with the monitors that are kind of available for folks to look at. And then here's that smaller group or EOC setup, where again, you have some of these that have monitors at their disposal. The floor cores are still involved there. Could potentially be reworked as part of that, but opens up that space just a little bit.
And am I correct that that is not raised?
Correct, this dais would not be raised. It would all be at the kind of the ground level. You can see it a little bit more clearly in this setup here. The function of raising it, given the space needs constraints, now you're pushing ramps and stairs out into it, it just wouldn't make sense. And it does give it, somewhat of a more casual feel by lowering it that, which may or may not be preferred by the board. Again, some of these kind of renderings that show what that might look like. You'll see this wall does some of those other elements for the branding, but also for the raceways. There's the portico doors, which would be adjusted. Right now, they're much higher. They'd be adjusted to be at what would be the normal floor height. Those 2 monitors that would be on the back wall behind the speaker. Here's some of the budget estimates as we work our way to that. These are construction estimates. I want to note too that the architect built out these estimates as whole of work, right? So we're not talking about certain line item costs. That's not part of what they were retained to do, but as whole of work based on those estimates and based on those, those componentry included. I know that it seems unique that the AV budget for concept 2 is cheaper than concept 1. That's mainly attributable to the fact that you're placing those smaller monitors with 1 monitor on that half wall. There's some quantity differences between the 2, but otherwise the AV really is largely the same across the board on that. It should be noted that the architect believes that the village, needs to do some asbestos testing, both in the ceiling, in the floor, and in the attic area where those new runs would be. Some of that HVAC work would be taking place, and obviously, there's a chance that that would require remediation and removal as well.
That's expensive.
It certainly can be, and obviously there can be work done to conceal that, to work around it. There's other options, but that's a part of that, that part of the discussion as well.
Depends on the nature of the remediation.
Correct.
As we pause there, an opportunity for questions, or to flip back to those slides. I know I moved through them, but in the interest of time.
What are the principal drivers of 150,000? Well, I guess it's 125,000 or $35,000 difference in construction between one, which is the least we can do, And, because we have to put some of the stuff in anyway. I mean, we're not gonna spend, I don't think anybody on the board would want to spend $500,000 and then have somebody say, and your ramp's not ADA?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So that won't happen. So right away, it's not really gonna be that big a differential because you have to do something to spend money. But seriously, what is the biggest driver of is it literally just, that's what it costs to knock it all down and move it? Move the dais?
Yeah, I think it is, right? I mean, between 1 and 2, you're replacing the dais in kind, so you capture the savings by that structure that's there now with the raised floor. And, you know what I'm talking about, the raised floor level behind the dais. Even though you're reconstructing in that space, you're able to reuse some of that portion. Whereas, and then option 3, you're obviously reconstructing the whole portion of the room to move it over there. It buys you some more floor space and flow of the room, but it does require that whole piece to be removed, all of the elements that are behind it to come down to what's the true floor level, including the portico doors, and all the finishes around it. Obviously, we talked about some minor componentry that was a part of that too, is, architectural elements like the design of the shades, the window treatments, the lights, things like that. But again, all these also include soft cost estimates for furniture. That's not just the chairs for there, but also for the training tables, for the chairs that are for the staff and for behind where the dais is.
And there's more furniture in the last, in item 3, because you've got a few more chairs and things like that. Choice 3 seems to provide the maximum flexibility in terms of the use of the room. Is that right?
I would say marginally. I'd say that's why we looked at it, is to see what kind of the bang for the buck would be in terms of being able to make that more drastic change, but how much we could get out of it. And I think part of what we found is, as we look at this, general seating for the general public, you're kind of looking at the same plan I am. That's 56. The others were 48. Could you look at that and find a couple more chairs? Of course you could, but I think that the difference we found is marginal. It does provide for a different flow of the room. So,
Question and a couple of comments.
please,
Jump in.
yeah, please.
What was the purpose of those raceways? They were not in part 1, but then why are we not, what's it for?
Yeah, so what we're kind of talking about is this here that is not included in 1, but is included in 2 and reincorporated in 3. Yeah, so not only do they provide kind of the design element, but they also provide a raceway, meaning an opening, a conduit for wires that would be in the ceiling that they could then be up there. So picture HDMI and data that is from these monitors here that's coming up through that drop ceiling and then needs to get back into the floor to be as part of the device inputs back here, or power that's from this part of the floor that needs to get up to that area of the room. It allows any of the data or power that's on the floor and in the ceiling to reach each other. How we
Why would we do it in option 1 without that?
it would essentially be through exterior wire covers, which look like that.
Oh, I see.
Which again is a viable option,
Okay.
but limits the ability to do some of those things. This also takes into consideration that if we're going to place these portico doors, because currently, wind blows in and out of them, sort of a thing, we're also going to kind of refinish that in a way that matches the aesthetic of the room, allows us to put our logo in the room, which is not currently there in kind of a prominent place. So again, admittedly, those are some of the architectural elements, but
Pretty clever way to, loop in functionality. Design. There's a couple comments are, not sure I'm a huge fan of that dividing TV in the middle of the room. I think it breaks off. It affects the intimacy between us and the speaker. We'd be staring at the TV. I think it'd be very rude for looking at the TV.
I think generally staff agrees, and
That's just my opinion.
yeah.
And similarly, I don't think the little monitors on every chair is really necessary. Everyone pretty much comes in with their own monitor, and I think we have enough TVs. I just wanted to make that.
Particularly if you're gonna put stuff on YouTube or
Wherever,
we could literally just pull it up on our own laptop that's It's pulling from the Wi-Fi and, I don't know.
But what about for Zoom? Like, what if, isn't it for like, if somebody, like if Howard would be on our little monitor in front of us versus on
Well, and again, I think that there's other ways, I
matters.
think there's other ways to compromise on that solution too, right? So, for example, are these just for the audience, or do they articulate off the wall to kind of be closer to their, instead of the 11 proposed monitors that are kind of included in this budget estimate, is it 5 or 6 because they're kind of between seats? There's other options to consider. But yeah, I do think that would be the detail is, right now, everybody turns around, right? This would give you the option to look halfway across the room or fully across the room to kind of that back wall. But, are there maps or information or other things that would be more helpful to see closer? Point.
If you have the monitor, you could always just turn it off, right? Like, so we're looking at Howard and we could, if someone's not there, you could see them there and then shut it off when someone's speaking.
I think where this comes into play is to some degree less with the types of things and presentations that the village board may see, but certainly with the zoning board and the plan commission, where you're looking at more detailed site plans, you're looking at more detailed maps and other physical things that right now, having it in front of you certainly would make it easier to see. It wouldn't be impossible in a variety of these different ways. I think the feedback on, maybe not at every seat is something we can look at.
Yeah.
There are also alternatives to a fixed wall. One of those alternatives that we've talked a little bit about is, do you create a movable, larger scale podium that has a screen built into the front of it that you can move out or move in? There are a number of council chambers that have something like that as well. It can work well, it doesn't always.
If this was maybe double wide and had a screen, but that was still on wheels to be removed.
Some of the issue also is, and this is what we would need to work with the architects on, is making sure that when you're comfortably seated, you can see over the lip of the dais. So you don't have to do this if you're looking at something that may be mounted in front of the speaker.
Yeah, something else we didn't talk about is that the reconstruction of the table would probably be less deep than it is now.
That is true.
It's very deep now, noticeably where the village president sits at its widest point. The idea of that is to be able to make sight lines to each other easier, but it also makes everything else more difficult. And so, just a thought there.
The table as it's designed today was designed for a time where we would frequently provide to the village board full-scale plan sets, and you'd need room to lay it out. And that's why it is almost 4 feet deep on certain parts of the dais, and it eats a ton of room.
And doesn't help its want to fall over as it's,
Right.
cavalieering off that piece. So,
The other thing is, nowadays with at least a lot of stuff with the flat screen technology, how far back would you have to have a centered screen so that the people with the wings
Can see it too.
can see it?
yeah.
And that eats up the room. And therefore now it's bigger, but it's also further away, and some of us are doing this and.
Yeah. It's a fair question. I do think that some of those deference points would be given to the AV company to help advise on those things. They take that into consideration. This is part of what they do. I would also say too that it's probably below the level of decision that we're looking for, tonight.
I think it's the feedback point though on what, are there comfort points for you? Because what we can do and take back is, if we're trying to squeeze 11 screens onto the dais, that might be crowded. How do we feel, or how would it look were there 6 or 5 screens on that same space? As you know, even up there today, you sit fairly close to one another. This is not a Supreme Court style dais where you've got 6 feet between each of you. So being able to share a screen is likely not going to too terribly negatively impact your ability to see something.
And you can use, if you have fewer screens and we're sitting a little more closer, you can have wider
screens.
Right.
And if there's fewer of them, and that gives you the functionality,
Yeah.
probably.
This is kind of a general brushstroke of what that could look like, but obviously there's room for flexibility.
And I love the fact that they have incorporated into the drawings the oldest fashioned microphones still in existence.
The gooseneck,
Our gooseneck. Yeah.
which they are still proposing at the locations. is
And
the
I just they
gooseneck.
have all the AV built into the.
There's ceiling microphones, there's lapel microphone wireless kits, but there's also those goosenecks. Their opinion is that they're the most reliable. And so for things like this, where you're having 11 of them, to have them wired in, as long as that piece of furniture, isn't needed to be moved, that's still their recommendation. Obviously, they'll look and feel a lot different than the ones we have up there now, but they're still gooseneck microphones.
We did have some extensive conversation about voice activated mounted in the ceiling microphones. And they're great when they work well, but they can be confused by the nature of what's happening below them. So that's something that as technology is continuing to evolve fairly quickly, that may change as we get to actual installation.
Yeah.
And we can look at that. Obviously, what we know we need is something that requires as little as possible for the speaker. Right now, you've got to remember to turn them on and off. We want to try to figure that out and make it a improved experience, because every time someone forgets to turn a microphone on, we degrade the recording, which is already degraded pretty poorly right now. That's going to be a significant benefit overall in whatever we do.
Well, there's also the issue of, I bring it up, but if someone thinks their microphone is off.
That does happen.
And admittedly now, they malfunction. So they can be probably turned on and also not picking up audio
Oh,
or
yeah,
vice
no.
versa. So that's
What's in this room?
microphone wise.
Microphones?
Yeah, so these two white circle,
Uh-huh.
those are the ceiling microphones. I think in here they work well because of the size of the room, the limited audio playback. But yeah.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions.
Please.
The doors are replaced in options 2 and 3, but not 1,
The portico doors are replaced in all three options.
in all 3.
Mhm.
And what about the other windows? Or is it just not, the other windows aren't perceived as an issue? Or?
The other, go ahead.
No, go John.
The other windows remain. We've talked about that. I think if we were gonna do windows, we would do it as a separate project for the building. Because
Okay.
all of the windows in the building, I shouldn't say all, almost all of the windows in the building are the exact same windows and the exact same dimensions. And so if we were gonna do something with windows, or egress from windows, we would do it as part of a window project, and so they're not proposed here.
But hold that thought on windows. for the moment.
I'm always thinking about
So,
windows. Another question, just in terms of a staff recommendation, there's clearly a different setup in the third, most expensive option with the dais, and I wondered, the egress seems better for us in case of emergency, or for whomever is sitting on the dais, and is that something that we should consider?
Yeah, and it's part of the reason for the design, that flow is definitely part of that.
Is there a less expensive but equally safe choice?
So.
Well, I would say, yeah,
table that.
that may actually be a good segue into a brief closed session conversation on this subject. But we may, if there are other questions, we may want to get those out on the table.
I just have a question on the screen. So these wall-hung screens, how do they compare in size to what I'm staring at right now?
Sure. So these are 85 inches.
Yeah.
They're bigger than this. I don't know how big these are. These are probably 65.
Okay, so
I
they
think
are.
these are 65.
Yeah,
65.
yeah.
Okay.
These 85, 85 is big, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're big.
But again, the idea is the fact that they're in those spaces that are able to be fixed for all uses, but it also means that the sight lines are, can be across the room. So it kind of gives that ability.
I would say, to some degree, also the screen design is being looked at from the standpoint of the EOC and the operation of that. So the Emergency Operations Center right now, as John said, exists in the basement. And it's basically the roll call room for the Public Safety Department, which may need to be utilized for other purposes in times of emergency. And one of the concept, all three of these concepts look at how this room could be utilized for an operational center in the midst of an emergency of some sort. The screen sizes need to be large in that environment because of the fact that there may be split or multiple screens within that same screen. And so that also is driving up the size of of those screens. But
Oh, I mean, it's a big room, so.
It's a big room.
It demands big screens.
Yeah.
And they weren't looking so big in the renderings.
Yeah.
That was more of my concern.
I don't think that in the renderings, these are intended to be that size. I think there's a little bit of the two hands talking to each other in terms of the two vendors.
Yeah.
And so take this scale with a grain of salt.
yeah,
So that wasn't.
Yeah, well, being a long-range thinker, my stuff is generally very big picture. One, I want to make sure that the sound works for everybody, that we don't have dead spots, those kinds of things. Second thing, when you have individual screens in front of each person and you're kind of peering over that, it's been mentioned to me that it provides a barrier between you and the people who are speaking. So what I just want us to think about is one of our goals here, for at least for me, I want to be able to connect with the audience. I want to connect. That means, I want to see them. I want to see what they see. I want to have that both visual and verbal communication with what's going on. And I like the idea of the extra panels and those things. That's really important. I'm kind of between a 1 and a 2 because the nice thing about being up a little bit higher is you can see a little better who's there and what's going on. On the other hand, it's nice to have more space. So there's no right answer on some of that stuff.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but isn't that, being up higher, isn't that contrary to your point about connecting with people?
I think it's both. Because I think you can see them better and they can see you better, can't they?
But they're seeing you there,
Hi.
not, if you want to connect.
Being lower
Personal
might
choice.
be an opportunity
it's
to
different
be
in every place.
friendlier, I guess. Yeah.
In the 4 communities I've worked for, each day has been different. Some have been on the floor, some have been raised 3 steps. So it's
Gary, do you think it's
no
some
one
sort
right
of
way.
weird power intimidating thing? I never thought of it that way.
I mean, historically, that's why.
For sure.
That is the psychological message you're getting is these people are up higher because.
If I could, I think there's some value to moving into closed session to talk about some of the security elements of the room. If we, want to come back into open session after that, we can have some more of this discussion. And then I also think too, part of the direction that staff's looking for tonight is thinking about the 2024 budget, right? And so I think some of these decisions can be part of that, but, aren't needed now.
John, before you do that, let me have just one minute to say, all of these options, thanks for doing all this. All of these options address the electronics, which we desperately need to do. So that's great. Second thing I just want to say is I think it's important that we not appear to be grand. I don't think our residents want us to be grand. And then the third thing is, and we've all remodeled our houses, and I think it's what I want to make sure when we choose the various options, we don't choose something that's less and immediately look at doing fixes and replacements that'll end up costing more. So if there's something we really should do, and maybe this is the segue to the closed session, if there's something we really should do and we're going to want to do, I would not be in favor of doing the lesser option and then immediately start wringing our hands about why we shouldn't have done more.
Give ourselves in trouble by spending $600,000 and then not doing all the things.
So with that, if it's time to go to closed session,
Well, or should.
okay.
We gotta do it after anyway.
Well, that's up to you. We've got 15 minutes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, did you have more?
No, I should say, I certainly can live with any of the options. And haven't come to like a firm conclusion. I'm on staff, laying this out for us pretty well, and, it's a lot to think about.
Yep.
And just again, I don't know how, we want to connect. Certainly, our residents would think twice if we were to build Taj Mahal. On the other hand, somebody asked me, well, what do you think about the, how the golf course will look? And I said, I think it should be nice. That's it.
Thank you. All right, thank you. That is all then. Could I please have a motion to move into closed session pursuant to the following section of the Open Meetings Act, which is 2C8, security procedures. If we could have a motion, please?
No, we won't have time.
Motion to move into closed session.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Trustee Hallwax. Yes. Trustee Listener.
Yes.
Trustee Mealopoulos.
Yes.
Trustee Underdog. Yes. Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Trustee Scott.
Yes.
All right, we're in closed session. Could I trouble you to